Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Waps and Graps. As always, I'm your host, Lyric Swinton. After a hiatus, you now get 2 episodes in 1 week, so that's fun. Yeah, obviously, earlier this week, you got the all-in preview where Charlie and I talked about all the things heading into this week with Wembley, all in Texas, and we also briefly chatted about the G1, just to talk about, Zack Sabre Jr. is coming home, had to have a proper Brit on the show to talk about that win. But as highly anticipated, we have a full length G1 deep dive of this tournament. I've been really excited to do this show, and I have a very special guest on this show that I've been trying to get on this show for a very long time since I was in Japan. But obviously busy schedules. We have Walker Stewart, the English voice of New Japan Pro Wrestling, is with us today. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. And that's shocking to say considering I have been it's back to back, like Best of the Super Junior Tour, G1. Both of those tours were 30 days long for me because I stayed a couple extra back in for Best of the Super Junior going into Seoul and all together. And it was a hectic schedule. The last 60 days out of 100 or 90 or something like that have been spent overseas, and it's been travel, wrestle. And yet I feel great. So yeah, we're coming off of a hot G1 and things are going well.
So you know what? Let's start there. Japan. You had some visa issues, but now you're finally been able to clear, and you've done Best of the Super Juniors, and G1 Climax. How was it? I mean, I think you had been before, but how was it doing the G1, just strictly from a spectator's perspective, being a front row seat for this tournament?
Right.
How was that?
Yeah, well, it's always my greatest honor to be able to do this. This is what I've always wanted to do since I was a kid, and I've talked about that in interviews previous, not specifically thinking New Japan in mind, but just any international or national wrestling platform. So for New Japan to be the ones to pick me and sign me to their organization and to pick up the ball and run with it after Kevin Kelly left, greatest honor in my life. I love doing it. G1 was unlike any other tour that I've been a part of. I've kind of dictated and showcased a little bit on Twitter over the course of the 30 days I was gone, but it was exactly 30 days, 31 maybe with the flight back included, whatever. And it was awesome. It was tiring. It was stressful. There was so many highs, so many lows personally within that period of time for me, things that happened in personal life and professional life. And it was just such a time where we talk about G1 Climax for our athletes being one where it challenges them. Guys like Bolton Oleg and Callum Newman, where we kind of got to bond a little bit, me all a little bit removed from the situation because they're wrestlers, I'm not. But our first G1s, our first time with such a strenuous schedule, stuff like that, we got to have those bonding moments. But we talk about your first G1 is going to be something that tests you every single time, especially from a wrestler's perspective. And it tested me a lot in a lot of personal and professional ways. And it was just great though. I have no negative words to say about it. It was awesome. I thought being live in the venue for every single one of these events was one of the coolest things ever. People talk so much about G1 Climax as much as it's G1 Climax and Wrestle Kingdom are the two things people talk most about when it comes to New Japan Pro Wrestling content. And to now be able to strike, I hit Wrestle Kingdom earlier in the year, I hit Dominion, Best of the Super Junior, and now G1 Climax being on that list. It was fantastic.
Absolutely. And I think also this was such a pivotal G1 Climax and New Japan's history. And I think that's a perfect way to get into it. Before we got on the stream, I said, one of the first things that I really wanted to chat about is where do we feel, how has people's stock increased? Just because, I felt like heading into this tournament, one thing that was said was that New Japan needs to create new stars. It's obvious, there's been a lot of departures. There's been a lot of movement, up and down the card. And I think that the baton has just been ready for people to just grab it, and make their own name and become, those new stars. And so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it with A Block. Let's start with, I'm going to save the people who ended up in the finals for last.
Sure.
Let's start with Shota Umino. About his tournament. So I'll start. I think that Shota Umino probably had the most to prove in this tournament, and I don't think that it helped that he came in with a significant injury.
Sure.
And I do think that as far as his stock, for me personally, I do think that he's a little bit down right now compared to where he was, simply because so many of his peers had such great performances. And so there's just so many moving parts, I think, with the injury, and I think, and also with a lot of other people really making a name for themselves. Talk about like what was like that reaction like in the venues, because obviously he's very popular. Obviously he's a fan favorite, amongst the kids, and so many people. And I would like to say, as a part of his class of, his peers, there's probably more of an emotional connection with him more so than any of his peers, just because of, you have to think New Japan is in his blood, essentially.
Sure.
So talk about like, how he was received during this tournament, and your own personal thoughts of like, his performance.
Sure. Yeah. No, pro wrestling is so circumstantial, right? In the way that you can be at the top of your game, you're moving, you're shaking, you're doing everything you got to be doing correctly. And then timing just does not work out. And I think that Shota Umino's G1 Climax was a case of timing and circumstance not being on his side. Going in with the injury, I think that Shota Umino has a lot of deeper things he could have pulled out of the bag in this tournament had he had been at 100%. And the way that the points lined up on the board led to Shota basically having considered the worst G1 run out of any of the young guys, right? And for a guy to back in February, we talked about it so much on commentary over the course of this G1. Back in February, beats Red Narita in a sold-out Korakuen Hall and calls himself the new ace of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And then ever since then has not been able to put those results on the board. And I talked about it on the show saying, hey, like, it's never a bad idea to call your shot, Babe Ruth it, shoot for the stars, et cetera, et cetera. But reality being what it is, like, Shota definitely made a lot of big promises and promised more than he was able to deliver. And there is a little bit of a fear there of, well, if Shota keeps promising the way that he has been and does not manage to pull through, some people are theorizing that people could turn on Shota Umino. We've seen it happen before with people saying that they're going to do certain things. They're going to bring New Japan to the top, and they fail. Umino is one of those guys that, we're a long way off from this, but Shota is one of those guys where if he keeps saying all these things, I'm going to win, I'm going to do this, I'm going to lead us through the generation, and he doesn't end up winning gold anytime soon. I mean, what do we talk about with Hiroki Goto, right? Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. So just one of those situations. Inside the venues, I know that sound can be different coming through World and then coming through the venues. People love Shota Umino. People are still on the Shota Umino train. I personally am still on the Shota Umino train just because it's not his time right now. Does not mean it won't be his time in the future. And I definitely think we only saw Shota at maybe 65% of what he's able to do in this G1. So my hope, heal up. Maybe a run on the road to the Tokyo Dome could lead to a clearer vision for Shota Umino, but for that time, that's where I see him being.
Absolutely. I think I have been a fan of Shota for a very long time, and I think that the potential is there, and but I do think he's at a crossroads of when can you have. I think all of them, honestly, of his entire class, for the most part, is at a crossroads of potential has to be able to be converted into results.
Right.
And when you look at it, between him, Yota Tsuji, Ren Narita, and Yuya Uemura, he's the only one who's never won a championship.
Sure. Yeah.
Japan,
and that sits heavily on the mind of Shota every single time he steps in the ring. And, it's one of those things where now it's almost like Uemura and are almost competing amongst themselves. Like they've all moved to first place and Umino is still sitting at the bottom. Right. And it's one of those things, you fear Umino being left in the dust there, and Umino has to be feeling that himself from a wrestling perspective and hope to be able to come back into that forefront, but it's going to take something big.
Absolutely. I think one thing that I just kept saying throughout the tournament is that I think he needs a complete rebrand. And I think somebody who's very similar to him, different obviously in some regard as far as like, you know, commercial success, I feel is Kaito Kiyomiya. Of just, for the longest time, it felt like, from the way that he dressed, from the way that he acted, from the way that he booked, it always felt like Kaito Kiyomiya was trying to be who other people wanted him to be. And like, you know, we've seen, like, I feel like Shota, he's been playing with like, you know, his look, his hair. It's always felt like it's kind of like, you know, trying to be the idea of what he feels somebody else wants him to be. And even, you know, other people talk about it. El Phantasmo has talked about it, you know, just constantly a feeling like, you know, this guy is so cool as a person, but like, that's not who we are getting to see on television or, you know, on World or things like that. And so I do think that that was one thing that came across with some of his peers, of like, everybody seems to be finding their groove with identity, because I think that that's really the true issue of just, that's one of the cruxes of, I think one of the reasons why we have such an emotional connection with Shota is because we got to see him grow up. We got to see him with his mentors, right? With Jon Moxley, with Will Ospreay. But now that those people aren't in the picture, it kind of feels like, you know, he's like lost some of like that direction of who he is, and still trying to like conquer, you know, chasing those shadows. And so I think that for him, it's really going to be about kind of like finding who he is outside of all of this. Like, you know, I don't think that you can help the company find its identity until you find your own.
Exactly. And, you know, one of the things we've talked about, and we talked about it in the G1 as well, it was Umino versus Naito in Korakuen Hall. And one of the things we talked about, the lines that we drew between the two men, with as much as Umino has idolized Naito, what did it take for Naito to finally connect with the people? It took him leaving for another excursion, going to CMLL, coming back Ingobernable, and going on this I don't want to say anti-hero run, but very much that
Absolutely.
it wasn't wearing the white hat, white meat, clean cut good guy that we had come to know when Naito won the G1 in 2013, right? So very much something where, hey, I'm not saying I know anything, but Shota Umino idolized Naito in that way. That's what it took for Naito to connect with the people. Maybe at one point something's going to switch in Umino where he realizes, hey, maybe I have to do the same thing. And maybe he goes away and it doesn't work. We have no idea. But yeah, Umino is definitely a different subject overall.
Absolutely. And I think like, and I think I tweeted this during the G1, is that looking at his performance, because he finished dead last as far as the young guys, I believe that his story will probably be forged in the chase rather than the celebration. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of times that is how an ace is formed, you know, of you see somebody lose over and over again until they finally win that big one, you know. And I think, like, honestly, well, the way his trajectory is going, his first championship might be the world championship. Who knows, you know, down the line. But it's going to be interesting to see. But I do think, like, between now and Wrestle Kingdom, I'm interested to see his personal development. I think, like, he has to figure out who he is. And maybe that is an excursion. You know, maybe that is trying to, you know, wrestling Jon Moxley again and trying to, like, conquer, you know, his mentors, you know, because you got to think he's never defeated Jon Moxley, or he's never defeated Will Ospreay. So maybe, like, you know, that's going to be his pathway. But I definitely think that there's a lot more that he hasn't scratched the surface of. And I think that came across in this G1. No, also an A block, Tetsuya Naito.
Yeah. Tetsuya Naito being IWGP World Heavyweight Champion and ending with the record that he had, by his own admission, is a poor performance. There is very little excuse, and Naito has said this himself, so this is not some crazy burial I'm going on. Naito says, hey, like, there's no excuse for a World Heavyweight Champion in the best professional wrestling company in the world to have not made it into the playoffs at the very least of G1. Naito admits that. You talk about whether people have ascended, descended, stayed at the exact same. I hate to say it, but if we're doing our power rankings here, Naito might have gone down a level compared to, you know, what we had seen previous to, and especially we talked about it in ring, the aging body, the aging mind, but the fiery and young soul that still exists in Naito. All those attempts at Destino that didn't exactly pan through, right? And Naito halfway late through the tournament trying to change things up a little bit, realizing, hey, I just got to stick to what I know, and it didn't work out for him. If Naito wants to be able to be in the, I know I don't want to jump the gun a little bit too much, but Great Okan coming up, Destruction in Kobe, whenever we come to that in September, he's really going to have to change up and maybe stray away from the Destino a little bit. Or, hey, maybe I know nothing. Maybe he's working on that Destino right now. But I think that Naito might have gone down a peg after this year's G1.
Absolutely. But, what I will say is that Naito going down a peg in this G1 definitely elevated a lot of other people.
Sure.
Being able to see, I feel like the playoffs were so interesting this year. Like it was so interesting this year, and I will say that's one thing that I can give this tournament was unpredictability.
Yes.
Was unpredictability of, typically, because I even told myself, I was like, well, if Zach loses to Naito in this block match, there's no chance he's winning. I said, there's just going to be like he'll probably be in Okan's position for the Destruction in Kobe match. That's it. Everything that we thought we knew about New Japan Pro Wrestling, predictable booking, was completely turned on its head. Sure. And so that is one thing that I think is really cool. But I think for Tetsuya Naito, I do think, for him to be IWGP World Champion, this wasn't obviously the G1 finish that you'd like. It's no secret that his body is no longer what it once was. And it's also no secret that his time as, a main event wrestler is probably limited at this point in his career. I think I'm interested because he has so many targets on his back right now that don't seem to just be surrounding the championship. I mean, if we look back to right before the G1, that LIJ 6-man tag was very, very interesting. And I think that there's been movements, with, you have Hiromu Takahashi looming in the wind, and you always have Yota Tsuji in the wind, and you have Shingo, who seems to want back into this main event picture. And so you have these internal tensions in addition to the rest of the roster clearly wants what he has. And then also it's the pressure from the audience, the company. Naito is the biggest star in Japan right. Easily. And if you've ever gotten the chance to see him in Japan, there's quite literally nothing like the connection that Tetsuya Naito has with fans. It has to be seen to be believed.
It's one of those things that I talk about occasionally is, so when Tetsuya Naito's music hits, it's one of the only songs that people chant along to before they even see him on the entrance ramp. Naito, Naito. The only other person they do that with is Hiroki Goto. So to place those two on that equivalent level, those are two of the most beloved people, especially we saw, and we'll get to Goto later on when we talk about Block B, but the groundswell of support Goto got just halfway through the tournament when it went from, okay, Goto's the oldest guy here and people aren't expecting him to win, to, oh my God, he might pull it off this year, right? Naito is... Naito's by far and away the biggest star in Japanese wrestling. And I think there's a couple of people that if they stayed over consistently in Japan could take that spot, but that's a conversation we'll get to later on when we talk about Block B. So
absolutely. And so, for Naito, I think, to be honest, I worry about his ability to make a star in, I think, a Tokyo Dome style main event. Just because I think the match is so important, just because I do believe New Japan Pro Wrestling is the best wrestling, pure wrestling in the world at its best. And there's quite literally nothing like it. I mean, we could go back to last year's G1, right? Those last two matches that Naito had were just mind-blowing. The match with Will Ospreay and then Kazuchika Okada, like, mind-blowing. And then, I mean, we've seen significant decline since then. I don't think we've seen him be able to, like, pull out a match since then, just like that since then. And I think that's why maybe the match with Yota Tsuji after New Japan Cup wasn't as effective as I believe that it probably should have been as far as Yota Tsuji's trajectory. And so I think that Naito, his journey to the Tokyo Dome is going to be very interesting as far as what is he able to do, especially like with the Destino, and is he going to be stubborn about it? Is he going to just commit to it? Or is he going to change things up? Is he going to surprise us? Is he going to work a more grounded style? Who knows?
Right.
But I think that those are probably the biggest questions with him. But I do believe on the power rankings, we definitely saw a drop as far in comparison to the other competitors in this tournament.
Sure.
Next, Shingo Takagi. I think potentially we have the complete opposite.
Sure.
Than we had with the Tetsuya Naito. Shingo's kind of like danced around the main event scene since he lost the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, but for the most part, he's been in Neverland, literally. Never open.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Neverland. But I think that we've seen a much more aggressive Shingo Takagi since particularly Forbidden Door. I think we can even see that, he's been wearing like the all black tights, a lot more. It's a significant shift. And he seems hungry. Like, obviously, did he win the tournament? No. But going as far as he did, I know I said I was going to save people till the end, but whatever. Going as far as he did in this tournament, I would say heading into the Tokyo Dome, towards the Tokyo Dome, I expect him to be positioned pretty nicely. He seems to be firing on all cylinders. Like, he seems to be back in rare form.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I've made no buts about it. Shingo Takagi is one of my favorite wrestlers on the active New Japan roster. He wrestles a style that as soon as I first saw it, and my first time getting to watch Takagi was actually live in person at like one of my first shows that I was in Japan for. Might have been Power Struggle. It was something along that line. But it was Fighting Spirit Unleashed in Vegas when he wrestled for the Never title with Tama Tonga. So like Shingo wrestles a style I love. And I think that you're absolutely right on the point of Forbidden Door being a turning point for him. I think that loss to Bryan Danielson is really one that did a number on his mental in the Owen Hart Memorial Tournament. And Shingo, we have seen that change. We've seen that aggressive change. We've always known Shingo to be a guy who likes to have fun in sense of toying with his opponents, et cetera, et cetera. But now it's almost a little vindictive, more than I typically would argue we've seen as of recent. Shingo's definitely one of those guys that I could see him looking across the locker room at a guy like Tetsuya Naito and sees double ice packs wrapped around both knees and sees, oh my gosh, Naito's feeling it. How much time do I have left? Shingo Takagi not far off age-wise from Tetsuya Naito or experience as well. So one of those things of, hey, if Naito might be winding down. We've been saying it for years, by the way. Naito might be winding down, so it could be another 5 years for that man. But I have to wonder if Shingo Takagi is looking and going, hey, maybe this is the time where I fill that gap that Naito might have to leave at one point, should he lose the World Heavyweight title and never gain it back.
And I go back to that, I keep going back to that LIJ 6-man tag. I think that you have 4 alpha males in one faction. And I say 4 because Hiromu Takahashi is clearly looking for a change. We don't know what that change is. We don't know what that change is going to be. But he's clearly looking for something. He's looking for a new mountain to climb.
Right.
And I think that we see Yota Tsuji came into New Japan hungry from like the day that he came off Excursion. Just like, from the way that he was presented, attacking Sonata, joining LIJ, His first match off excursion was for the world title. He's made it very clear that he's willing to go through anyone, including his LIJ faction, and that's why he's in LIJ, to be surrounded by people that, you know, he feel like challenges him. And then you have Naito, who is the most popular person in Japanese wrestling today. And you have Shingo Takagi, who clearly has a chip on his shoulder. And I think that it's very interesting. I think if you go back to the 6-man tag, the interaction between Shingo Takagi and Yota Tsuji was mind-blowing. Of the way the chemistry that one of those two had as opponents. They're typically partners, but as opponents. And I think that they very much want the same thing. You know, many people were saying throughout this tournament that they expected that to be the final. You know, and it almost very much was. If you know, if Zack Sabre Jr. had not defeated Shingo. So I do think, and we have to think, next month is 20th anniversary for Shingo Takagi. He gets his own show. I'm not sure. Do you know if anything has been announced for that? Has it been?
The card has been announced fully for the Shingo event. So topped out with a LIJ v LIJ 6-man again. However, Shingo Takagi, Bushi, and an unknown partner. So we have an X thrown up on that one, mystery guest.
And so he up against what, Yota Tsuji, Naito, and Hiromu Takahashi?
Yes, I believe so.
You know, I would like for that 6th person. I would hope it was somebody from Dragon Gate. That would really pop me. You know, from his past, maybe a Mokuzuki. They had a fantastic match earlier this year, Cork and Hall. For Mokuzuki's anniversary, or maybe BB Hulk, something like that. But yeah, so I think Shingo Takagi, I would say on the power rankings, improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Stocks are high. Next, Sonata.
Sonata is one that I would keep right in the middle. I
agree.
I think that I'd put Sonata right in the middle. I think it was a cold start to the G1 Climax for Sonata. Not a lot of movement, taking the that opening night loss to Jake Lee in sub 5 minutes. Like that was a really rough start, and started to turn things up near the end. Sonata versus Gabe Kidd was a really fun showing that put Sonata on top there. Sonata Shingo Takagi, especially in the main event of Korakuen Hall, was it's got to be on a top 10 list somewhere in this year's G1. But yeah, just it was a bit of a middle of the road G1 for Sonata. Came down close to the end to make it to the playoffs, but I'd like to think that for a guy like Sonata he won his final G1 match, and then it was just left in the hands of destiny. If things had worked out differently in the numbers, could have got it, but I think I'd keep him right in the center.
Yeah, I think he's so interesting because obviously anything except for just about winning was going to be a decrease when you think that about the fact this time last year he was the champion.
Right.
But I will say about Sonata, I am not always enthralled by his in-ring style. I mean, sometimes I do think like the Cold Skull thing is boring. However, this tournament was the most I've ever enjoyed him as a wrestler.
Really? Okay.
Purely from an in-ring perspective, Sonata has several of my favorite matches in the tournament.
Wow. Okay.
Several. The Shingo match, obviously. The Zack Sabre's Jr. match was, I think, incredible. And I do think that from an endearment perspective, I think that his performances were more over with the audience. It felt like at least that's how it came across on screen than in the past. Because I think that that's one thing that Sonata has lacked. And I think that was maybe the story going into Wrestle Kingdom this year. That emotional connection with the audience. And like, you know, we all know the moment when he broke and cried and like the audience cheered. And so I do feel like we shifted there a bit as far as they're starting to feel like this natural affection starting to be gained from the audience for him. But I do agree, like generally, think we're pretty much middle of the road here.
Sure.
I don't think it hurt him, but I don't think like it helped him much.
Sure, and I think it's an interesting comparison, having been ringside for all of G1 this year, to think about Sonata's reactions from an audience compared to, and it's an unfair comparison to compare anyone to Tanahashi, but I'm going to do so for just a moment. Hiroshi Tanahashi hits the ring, and you watch enough Japanese wrestling, you hear it. Their entrance music shuts off, and then a form of cheering in this country is just shouting the name of whoever, so you hear Tanahashi, they're going off on it. Tanahashi gets that constant buzz and eruption whenever he's standing in the ring and his music cuts off. Sonata, it's almost like people watch with a bated breath. Sonata's one of those guys that he draws you in just by his presence, but it's not an electric presence. It's not a loud presence. It's one where you're going to keep your eyes on him and go, what's this guy going to do? Right. And I think that's something going forward into the autumn where, we're going to talk about it later, but the Wrestle Kingdom 19 main event is not certain, not by a long shot. And for all these people, it's important to point out that any of the 20 men that were involved in this year's G1 could be opposite whoever's the world heavyweight champion in the main event of the Tokyo Dome. We have no idea what direction things are going to go in. And so for a guy like Sonata, it's great news to see that the G1 challenge for the world title will be taking place at King of Pro Wrestling in October. Really, for everyone on the roster, it opens up for more opportunity. And a guy like Sonata being middle of the road, he's going to need opportunity.
Absolutely. Next, Great-O-Khan. I think that's a definite.
Yes.
Listen, I typically, before this tournament, I can name every Great-O-Khan match I've ever liked on one hand and not use all my fingers.
Sure. Okay.
Sometimes I think he veers into a lot too much of a comedy wrestler, or just like not too serious, or someone I can't personally take seriously.
Right.
However, this tournament, best performance I've ever seen from him.
Sure.
Like, just, I think he locked in. He found it what works from him. Like, did he become a completely different wrestler overnight? No. But he found a lane that worked for him. And I see all the good qualities that people have been talking about this guy. I think that you can't look at this. He honestly, I didn't expect him to go to the playoffs, but by the time that he made it, I was like, doesn't make sense. Yeah. I was like, he's earned it.
Yep.
I don't see how Great-O-Khan can look at this at anything less than a victory coming out of this G1.
Got him an opportunity at the IWGP World Championship, right?
Absolutely.
We'll be seeing that coming up, Destruction in Kobe in September. And, we talked about how much the main event at the Wrestle Kingdom Tokyo Dome event coming up January 4th, 2025 is up for grabs. Holy hell, who could have thought 4 months ago that Great-O-Khan could be in the main event of the Tokyo Dome, when that guy was trying to put Yuya Uemura through a table and they were eating lemons in the middle of the ring.
Lemons.
Yeah, they were eating gyoza, eel, and lemons in these rural revitalization matches. But much how we talked about, take for instance a guy like Shota Umino. Shota Umino trying so hard to find himself. Just because Great-O-Khan's been around a little bit longer than Umino has does not mean he still hasn't found himself. I think now he has. I think he's found the avenue that's going to bring him success. Okan thinks that professional wrestling is Great-O-Khan. Professional wrestling, it was all about what style he wanted to put on display to the world. And his plan going into this tournament, he talked about it in post-match comments a lot, was I want to wrestle every single opponent in their own style. So wrestling Zack Sabre Jr. technically, going strike for strike with Gabe Kidd. He didn't mind taking it to the outside with a guy like Evil in Block A, right? And it took halfway through the tournament for Great-O-Khan to realize, hey, just like Umino, I can't be everyone else. I can't be what everyone else might want me to be. I have to do what I know works. It's the technical side that brought Great-O-Khan to the dance in the playoffs, and it could win him the World Heavyweight title coming up in Kobe.
I think that heading into this tournament, I think that with so much uncertainty around New Japan, I feel like the only thing that was universally agreed upon, I feel like, between the fans, the company, everything, is that look at this G1 as a clean slate.
Yes.
This is an opportunity for wrestlers. If anything hasn't been working, this is an opportunity to reintroduce yourself at the ball. You know, this is to redefine yourself. You know, how do you want to be presented? Who are you? I felt like this was a clean slate for everybody. And I feel like Great-O-Khan probably and a few others really took advantage of that opportunity to redefine themselves in front of the audience. And I think, you know, what's been so interesting is that when you look at over the past year, there's been so much infighting within United Empire on who's the leader, who's this, who's that. When Great-O-Khan, one of the co-founders of the organization, went the furthest in the G1 Climax tournament, which is, I think that's such an interesting contrast. And because, you know, there's just been so much talk about like who's leading. And for him to be the one leading, but by example.
Right. Yeah. And you know, that was one of those things, like I remember Will Ospreay had offered the position of leader in United Empire to Jeff Cobb and Great-O-Khan being the two you know, original members of the Empire, so to speak. And Jeff taking the stance that was like, hey, I appreciate you looking at me that way, but the whole idea of United Empire when we started was there is no leader. We are all the top of our game in our own divisions. TJP and Akira in the junior division, Callum Newman now trying to be the top of the game in the heavyweight division as much as possible, whether it's middle of the card, upper of the card, main event, whatever the situation ends up being for Newman. And TJP said, hey, I think I could take us into this new generation. I have that experience level. I've been everywhere from TNA to WWE to now here in Japan. I think I could pull this off. And everything that happens in United Empire and the success that comes from United Empire. Yes, it was Great-O-Khan that got those singles wins, but people are going to kind of look at, well, who's the leader of the group and what makes up this group, right? Great-O-Khan taking it to that place, TJP not going to take credit for it, but going, hey, like, this is my empire and this is incredible. Like, this is what we're wanting here. And all of that even leads to, I don't know if you saw the card announcement, but for the Destruction Series, the newest member of United Empire, Jacob Austin Young, who is coming in. Yeah, I know. It's a shock. Jacob Austin Young announced to be on the undercard, TJP, a lot of conversations in the United Empire ranks, pulling in Jacob Austin Young from New Japan Strong, coming over for a series and basically being, hey, we'll try you out in United Empire and see how you like it and see how we like you and if you can prove anything. Don't expect Jacob Austin Young to come in with a dominant winning streak by any chance, but could be a very interesting situation compared to how Will Ospreay brought Callum Newman into the United Empire ranks, right? And, you know, a lot of things are changing in United Empire, and whether it's for the best or for, you know, just one person's sole benefit, we're going to have to find out.
Would that make him the first American?
Other than Cobb, who technically has the American nationality, but yeah, like Jacob Austin Young.
Yeah, he is technically from America because I always think Guam when I think of Jeff Cobb.
Right.
So
yes,
that's so interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to skip Zach, obviously,
sure.
But Gabe Kidd.
Yes, yeah, up for sure.
Double up, I would say. Outside of the winner, we're looking at one of the best, I think, overall block performances. Well, I mean, outside of somebody in B block who we'll talk about, but block performance wise, he got something out of. I think what's so impressive about Gabe is that he got something out of everyone.
Right.
He gave even people I typically can't stand wrestle their best match.
Yeah.
I enjoyed an Evil match because of Gabe Kidd. I enjoyed a Jake Lee match because of Gabe Kidd. Yeah. I enjoyed everything that Gabe touched in this tournament. And everything that he did, every match he was in, the bottom was good, but the ceiling was great.
Right.
Everything ranged from good to great, between good to great, and everybody can't say that about their tournament this year.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Gabe, one of the most interesting developments. The G1 Climax is so interesting to me because over 30 days, someone can become a completely different person. I found myself with a lot of new qualities, even just at the broadcast booth and in my personal life after G1 Climax this year. So for Gabe Kidd as an active competitor, we're all on the road together. We are all in these hotels. We're all on the same hectic schedule. Has made probably one of the most interesting pairings in New Japan Pro Wrestling right now, off of what was basically a booking decision to throw War Dogs together in the undercard tag, and look how well they gelled together. I'm talking Gabe Kidd and Jake Lee. And the development that has come out of both of those guys, who I love talking about, the Mad Bastards as they're now known, the yin and yang of Gabe Kidd and Jake Lee, where Jake Lee has this high intelligence, and nobody's ever called Kidd an unintelligent man, but has always typically been more bronze than brain inside the ring. Jake Lee able to slow down Gabe Kidd, go, hey, hold on a minute, let's think about this smart, but apply the same pressure. Jake Lee, as smart as that man is, call him a smart bastard for a reason. Well, Gabe Kidd is able to add that extra level of aggression that Jake has had at points in his All Japan run and in his Noah run, but needs to be brought out more when you're dealing with the level of competition that New Japan has, right? And so for Gabe Kidd and Jake Lee to have formed the Mad Bastards, that might be one of the biggest landscape-changing things in New Japan, especially looking at the tag team division. And we just lost Gorillas of Destiny with El Phantasmo and Hikuleo now no longer being a duo, and you kind of look at the tag field whenever we get into World Tag League season and go gosh, like, what really is the tag division in New Japan at this point, right? Well, we know what it is now, and it's in trouble because Gabe Kidd and Jake Lee have formed together. Definitely one of my favorite runs in G1 this year came from Gabe Kidd, top to bottom.
And I think like something else definitely worth talking about is the connection with the audience. Of just like, it's becoming harder and harder. And the thing is just like, it's very clear this audience wants to cheer him. They love him. I think like when somebody, you can tell when people are hating from a place of hate and so hating from a place of passion.
Right.
And I think that when Gabe Kidd, when he disparages New Japan Pro Wrestling and when he says certain things and does certain things, it's very clear this is coming from a place of real passion. Right. Even some of the things that he says, like some of the famous rant on Tanahashi and like so many different things that he said, some of the points that he makes are so obscure that only a true puro nerd, like a real nerd, would even know this stuff in the first place.
Well, it's so funny to me because it's like, what happens when the most unlikable person makes a good point?
Yes.
Right? And Gabe Kidd, Gabe is, I'm sure he's a fine guy by War Dog standards, but one of those things where everything he's ever shown in the ring comes from a place of disrespect. It comes from a place of I am better than you. It comes from a place of you can't touch me. And as much as he wants to bury and trash on certain aspects of Japan or Japanese wrestling, he's studied those aspects, and it because, and I'll never forget this, joins me at the broadcast booth for a couple of nights, right? And we were calling a Konosuke Takeshita match, and he referenced this guy is trained by Senshiro Takagi, talked about DDT, and I kind of give him this side eye, and you can't see it off camera, but you kind of give me the side eye where it's one of those things where it's like, what do you know about Senshiro Takagi, right? You've obviously studied this. There's a reason that he's familiar with these things, and the callback to some of the more famous matches that happened. I'll remember that we called back to historically an Inoki match during the Yokohama Budokan event. Zack Sabre Jr., Gabe Kidd, him saying, "Hey, it's the anniversary of this match, and you're never going to remember that match." So he's going to disrespect the legacy, but acknowledge the legacy. He obviously cares about Japanese wrestling, and that's what the fans, I think they're having this inner turmoil, push and pull back and forth with each other, where it's like, I really love that this man respects our sport and our lineages like this, but he just doesn't show it. And it's all comes down to a personality thing. If Gabe could flip a couple of switches and be a bit of a nicer person overnight, it would be a lot easier of a reaction to try and figure out one way or another. But something tells me we're a long way off from that, especially if Gabe keeps hitting the lemon sours like he has with Jake Lee. It's gonna be a different time. So
it's so interesting. I think especially going back his commentary performance. I love listening to the wrestlers on G1 commentary, obviously, but I believe he was my favorite. Like, he was definitely the type of knowledge only comes from if you love it, like that type of knowledge. Even like, like the gear that he has, with the coat and the hood inspired by Dr. Death. It's very clear that even like drawing upon that shows that the type of foreigner he wants to be, in New Japan. Like, he wants to take up space. He wants to be one of those people in Japan that is remembered for years and years and years. Like, one of the, so it's very interesting. And I remember like I forgot, who did he wrestle first night? Who did he wrestle the first night?
Might that have been Evil? Or yes.
And the way that the crowd lost it for him. And like, I remember people were saying, well, it's just because he's up against Evil. Like, it doesn't mean like they really love him. But you're starting to see, like, even in the matches after that, it's going to be, I don't know. It's becoming a thing of just like, it's getting harder and harder for people to boo him, but he's going to try his harder to make them. He's going to try his hardest to make them.
It all depends on what he wants to do, but it's so interesting because I've heard Japanese broadcasters on the New Japan World side refer, and I can't remember the exact term, but something translating along the lines to like dark hero or anti-hero. And it's one of those things where Gabe can disrespect his opponents all that he wants. It's the disrespect toward the crowd that is not allowing for that gap to be met, for the crowd to be like, yes, I can cheer for this man. We've seen opponents disrespect each other and crowds still find a favorite, right? It's the fact that, maybe if Gabe does receive some of that love, he could start to love back, but I just don't know. And it's only going to be one of those things we find out with time.
And I think that's the difference with a guy like Naito, right? Of just like, people are fine with him disrespecting his opponents, but as long as he loves the people,
right?
He's the guy.
Yes.
Moving on, Jake Lee.
Sure. So a majority of my familiarity with Jake Lee does not come from his All Japan run. Barely comes from his Noah run. I've seen more New Japan matches he's had than Noah matches. All of that being considered, I've seen a little bit from one of his runs as GHC heavyweight champion. I saw the disbandment of BLG, and it kind of just went from there. So, if you've had more Jake experience, you might be better to give a thumbs up or thumbs down. But I'm giving a thumbs up here to Jake Lee personally, just with what I was able to see from the 30-day stretch of advancement. Starts off with a really hot win, and then it was loss. But it's around the time we start seeing more, like I said, with Gabe Kidd, the collusion between those two. We saw the fire pick up with Jake Lee. I think that this is kind of the genesis for something new with Jake Lee. So we shouldn't judge him based off of this G1, but rather see how his development is for the next year. And G1 35 could be dangerous.
See, that's why I have two answers. I think for fans who are new to him, I think that probably a thumbs up.
Sure.
I think for people who were familiar with him before and with his work, because I didn't watch his All Japan run, but I saw his entire Noah run.
Okay.
So literally from the day he debuted at Noah New Year, at Noah New Year to the last match that he had in Noah. So like, I saw the entire Noah run. I think for people, I think he's middle of the road.
Sure.
I would say for people who had seen him before, just because I will say, not for me, Jake Lee is not an exciting wrestler at all. I pretty much hated his GHC heavyweight title run. But I did not like most of his first part of this tournament. However, I did see growth. I did see improvement as we progressed. And I do think that pairing him with somebody like Gabe Kidd is a good decision. I do think that it is a good decision. I think it's going to help him tremendously. And I'm intrigued to know more. And I think that that's all that I can, that's the nicest thing that, as long as I am still interested in
Sure.
learning more, I'd say middle of the road. So
Yeah.
not down, but middle of the road for somebody who had been seeing him before this. But I can completely understand how people who are new to him can say improve. And there's also a thing too, just like Jake Lee is trying to do something that has never been done before.
Mm.
He is trying currently on track to be the youngest man to ever win the Triple Crown, GHC Heavyweight Championship, and IWGP Heavyweight Championship.
Right.
And so he's done kind of rapidly. Like he was only in Noah for a year.
Mm.
Like, was that? Yeah, he was only in Noah for about a year and a half.
Right.
He was in All Japan much longer, and then New Japan is obviously that's the final stop, but it's also the biggest challenge he's ever faced.
Yeah, yeah. And this is not to give any disrespect to All Japan or Noah whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of it's pressure too. I mean, there's no doubt about it. New Japan Pro Wrestling is the biggest wrestling promotion
Easily.
in the country of Japan, and in my opinion, the best pro wrestling in Japan. But that doesn't mean that Noah, All Japan, DDT, anything like that doesn't have incredible wrestling. That's why I watch all of them, right? But it's a matter of some people fold under the pressure. I think,
Absolutely.
for instance, in G1, or even let's throw it before that. Altogether, I think Jake Lee had all the skills in the tool belt to beat Naito, but it was the pressure that didn't allow him to do so. I think in G1 it was the exact same situation. Maybe it's one of those things where, hey, there's that white whale that you always chase, and the person that you always get put in the ring with, who throughout your entire career you can never beat. Maybe Naito is that for Jake Lee, but all things being considered, I think Jake Lee is a guy that might be thriving on a lower scale, but when you put that pressure on him on the upper side, maybe he needs a couple of friends in his corner to kind of boost that support. And that's what War Dogs is, and the way that War Dogs is going to serve Jake Lee's purpose in New Japan Pro Wrestling. The question that I have, though, is when Jake Lee says, hey, I have aspirations of IWGP Gold, and say he wins the heavyweight title ahead of say the leader of the Bullet Club, David Finlay, are we going to run into a couple of problems, right? And that's
Absolutely.
just one of those things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that at the very minimum, I can say that Jake Lee is hungry and he's ambitious because he's here.
Yes.
He went from All Japan to Noah to New Japan. That means that he wants to be the best. He wants to be the face of pro wrestling. And so I can always respect hunger. Yes. I'm just interested to see how far that ambition takes him, specifically being in a faction like the Bullet Club War Dogs, where everybody's hungry. That's the whole basis of the faction.
Yes.
So that's going to be interesting. Next, we have Evil.
I keep Evil middle of the road, probably. I think it's maybe middle of the road, maybe closer to the upper side. I'll say that we've seen a lot less House of Torture interference, in my opinion, over the past few months. Is it the strengthening of Hontai and Tanahashi, Oleg, Yano, that sort of group? Of course, it will be House of Torture versus the Never Openweight 6-man tag champions coming up later on in future tours to come. That match has been confirmed. I forgot for what exact show, maybe a Korakuen Hall, but so that is going to be happening. But Evil is one of those guys who, gosh, when he puts the working boots on, he's working. It's great. It's really great. And it's all the outside factors that keep that greatness at bay, in my opinion. But it's what he wants to do. It's the style that he wants to compete in. And no one's going to be able to take that away from him unless they stop him forcefully. Is that going to happen? I'm not sure. But I don't think there's been any real steps forward or steps back for Evil. Just kind of always being a threat, sitting at the top of, close to the top of the board.
I agree. And I will say this, I'm typically, like, anybody who watches my podcast know that I'm a notorious Evil hater. However, my enjoyment was not as ruined this go around. You know, there wasn't some, like you said, not as much House of Torture interference. He got a couple good matches out of it, you know, like he actually locked in, you know, and some of these, like the Gabe Kidd match was fantastic,
Yes.
in my opinion. I'd say middle of the road too. He's always somebody to keep in the back of your mind as a legitimate threat, you know. But I don't think, like, you know, he moved particularly up or down. So I'd agree on Evil. So
I'd argue that Evil is one of those guys who you could flip a coin and probably right as to the result of what the match is going to be, because so many of those matches that we saw, especially when it came to the House of Torture interference, and you know, especially we got later deep in the tournament, we saw a lot of times where it really could have been anyone's match, and not because of Evil's skill, but rather because Evil had the tools in the pocket of Dick Togo and every other member of the island of misfit toys, right? And so I specifically think of, you know, Evil Shota Umino as being one of those matches where, you know, 1-2, oh my God, I thought that was it. And then here comes so-and-so, 1-2, oh, I thought that was it. Here's Tanahashi, 1-2, oh no. Like, and so close at so many points. And so I think Evil's way forward, if he wants to find himself, God forbid, at the top of New Japan Pro Wrestling again, he's going to need more tools in his toolbox. And we saw, if you watch the undercards of G1 Climax, that there were attempts to pull more tools into the toolbox. One of those tools coming out of Block B, we'll probably talk about later.
Absolutely. That's an interesting conversation.
Yes.
And last but certainly not least, in Block A, Callum Newman.
Yeah, I think any performance out of Callum Newman would have been an up. Absolutely.
Just being in the tournament period, I think for him was a positive. Listen, a lot of people are just like, oh, he's a Will Ospreay clone, etc. Listen, there's a long time where people call Will Ospreay a Kenny Omega clone.
Yes.
Guess what? He's what, 21, 20, 21?
21. He's
still figuring it out. He's still finding himself. Just being in the tournament at all is a privilege. And it's only going to help him. In what, a month span, he's wrestled Tetsuya Naito, Zack Sabre Jr., Shingo Takagi. You can't beat that level of experience. He has great instincts. He's clearly a great athlete. Does he have it all up here yet as far as ring of IQ? No, but that will all be developed. But he is doing all the right things now. And so I feel like some people had pressure on them. Some of these guys had pressure on them to be a finished product in this tournament. And so everybody came into this judged by different standards. So the standard that we're judging Shota Umino by is not the same standard that we're judging Callum Newman by. Like this, I feel like the Callum Newman in this tournament, that's an investment. This is an investment pick. This is investing in his future. He's going to think about how good he's going to be in a tournament like this 2-3 years from now.
Gosh, Lyric, you're speaking with too much common sense. I don't know if the fans, I don't know if wrestling fans can comprehend this idea. No,
they can't take it. Internet can't take it.
It's you know, I saw so much detracting of Callum Newman online, and let's be honest here, I know Newman saw it too. You know, we're all on social media. It's 2024. He's in the biggest tournament and the biggest spotlight he has ever had so far in his wrestling career. Obviously, you're going to see those things, and even a lot of people don't want to think about that, but God forbid Callum Newman opens his Twitter and sees a notification where someone says that he's the worst wrestler he's ever seen. You know, I don't think it's going to affect him personally, but God, when you're getting down into those moments in a 15+ minute match with Shingo Takagi, where the doubts are starting to creep in, what's pushing those doubts forward? It's going to be these negative critiques at an age like that. And I speak from that same age, right? I said 22 years of age, but still similar enough. So all of that being said, when those doubts creep in, knowing that there were detractors, knowing that there were people that were like, I don't want to see Newman in this tournament. Why wasn't it Taichi? Why wasn't it Yoshihashi? Well, it was Callum Newman. And gave up the performance, which he did. I think that Newman's was very impressive throughout this tournament, especially his match with Shingo, which I know I spoke to him a little bit in a little bit of a media interview that we did. Callum Newman talked at length about just like the respect he had for Takagi, the weight of that match going into it for him when he grew up watching DDT. And he grew up watching Shingo, and that was what made him want to become a professional wrestler. And to score that win over him with the Oz Cutter and have Shingo, who was one of Ospreay's greatest opponents in New Japan, to go, hey, that Oz Cutter hit a little bit more and hurt a little bit harder whenever Newman hit it rather than Ospreay. And whether he's kind of, joke, nudge, who's to know? But I think Newman did great. I think there's a very, very high ceiling on Callum Newman. He's not even close to hitting at this point.
Absolutely. He hasn't found himself yet. And the thing is, if you can get the wrestling piece yet, like once you get the mind and you get like the identity part, he's gonna be incredible. And I think like he did very well keeping his head during this tournament. Like I said, he has great instincts. Like, he has really great instincts. And I think here's the thing, guess what, guys? It's like this instant gratification thing of Ospreay clone now, but like who's to say that one day, years from now, when Ospreay returns to the Tokyo Dome, they don't have a moment like him and Ospreay and Kenny Omega had, right? Like in the Tokyo Dome of like that finally, it's just, I don't know. I think like people are being very short-sighted here because those would be the same people who would be like, New Japan isn't investing in creating new stars. This was the investment. This is the new star. Yep. This is literally the point. Yep. This is what we're here for.
Yeah, right. And I have to commend Callum Newman on a lot of levels personally, being able to ship himself off to Japan, which for what was originally supposed to be kind of like the Jacob Austin Young situation, he's going to be coming in for a month for a tour. TJP will feel out how he does, and hey, maybe they want to keep him as a part of the Empire, or maybe hey, it's going to be back to New Japan Strong for you. We have to hope our best for Austin Young in that regard. But Newman came in a very similar deal with when Will Ospreay was leading United Empire at the time, and it turned into 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, put yourself up in a hotel for that long, keep yourself occupied, isolate yourself from all your friends. You can come to the dojo or work with Ospreay for training, but you got to improve and here's your time to shine. And by God, Newman's done that. I have a lot, and he doesn't know this. We haven't talked about this, so I'll say it here. I mean, I have a bit of a personal connection to Newman in the way where Newman came in September 2023. I came in October 2023. Similar ages, different roles. Sure, his much more of importance than mine is, but there's kind of that light connection that I've felt with Newman in that way. So when Newman did get announced, not for the tournament specifically, but for the Block A play-in, just to try and make his way into the thing, I was like, that's big for Newman to make his way in and have the performance that he had. Especially God, who could have predicted the opening night win over Umino, right? That was a big one to me.
Shocker.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the first match, right? Was that the first match? Yeah,
one
first
of them.
Match of the tournament.
Yeah. So I thought Newman's done great. I think that it's one of those things, we're told all the time, especially being as young as we are. I know that the boys hear it more than I might, but it's one of those keep a good head on your shoulders. And for the most part, Callum has done exactly that. A couple of slip-ups here and there in 30 days and in weather and heat that he's never been exposed to before for that prolonged period of time. And a grueling schedule. I mean, Newman did a lot on the independents in his time in the UK, but wrestling 19 nights, a lot of which being in a row in a 30-day period, he hasn't had to do that before. There's another guy in Block B who has never had to do that before. We'll talk about later.
Yeah.
There's a lot to commend for Newman. I'm excited to see 4, 5, 6 years down the line what Newman's looking like.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing about that's lovely, I think, about Puro as a whole, but I think it's also one of the things that's hard of just there's so much history attached to it, to the point to where when you're young and trying to, even me as a content creator, I'm 26, I was 25 when I went to Japan, and doing media and everything, it's overwhelming and it's intimidating. And so I can only imagine people who are working doing this full time, just because it's very intimidating and there's a lot of pressure because you want to get it right. Because there is somebody with like a history book who's going to tell you when you get it wrong.
Yes.
Who's
Yep.
literally always on Twitter going to be like, well, actually,
Yeah.
well,
Yes.
actually, um, it's a lot of pressure to be young. And I think as a foreigner, but with such a deep appreciation for this culture, for the company, for the country, and you just want to get it right, right? And so there's so much pressure attached to that, and so I have such a deep respect for people who are still willing to like take on all that pressure and do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to Block B. I'm going to save the finalists for last. El Phantasmo.
Oh, brother. All right. Yeah. Phantasmo, man, either middle of the road or maybe a step down. I think he'd admit that himself too. We talked at the beginning of this tournament so much about, okay, going in, El Phantasmo was feeling so low and down in those dumps. And we actually saw like the effects of I don't want to get extreme here, but the effects of depression work their way throughout 30 days. It's one thing to see someone low one time. I was on the bus with El Phantasmo for a lot of times. I saw how the loss of Hikuleo affected him in that way, and how the early goings of G1 with like a 3 or 4 match losing streak in the early going affected him a lot as well. And we were really hoping that we would see some sort of breakthrough for Phantasmo, some realization of I didn't need Hikuleo. Maybe I don't even need Jado. I can do this on my own. I can be a singles wrestler in the heavyweight division and be a mainstay in Hontai or whatever the decision were to be. And now we've seen less of that and more so Phantasmo find his way into this like tug of war between Hontai and House of Torture, not just, with himself, but also, outwardly, both groups wanting El Phantasmo and his services. It's a very different direction than I thought we'd see this G1 take Phantasmo. That's for sure.
I am deeply disappointed.
Sure.
And I'll say this why. Last year's G1, El Phantasmo actually had one of my favorite performances as far as overall.
Yeah.
I felt like he told a very interesting story in the tournament of him essentially making amends and also like really like tying loose ends from his time in Bullet Club. I think the Kenta match last year stood out to me of like, obviously he had gotten ousted by David Finlay by that point, and that was when the crowd had really embraced him, as this beloved character once he broke away from Bullet Club. And I feel like he told a beautiful story in that aspect in G1. Did he win? No. But I feel like that it felt like he was finally spreading his wings. And, that was when, even God, invited him in, things like that. And I feel like this tournament has been the complete opposite.
Sure.
It was like, who am I without my friends, etc. And I don't like that approach at all. I don't like that approach. Don't get me wrong, guys. Like, I get it. Like, losing your friends is hard, 100%. However, I think that El Phantasmo he's come such a long way in New Japan from being a junior heavyweight, from being just a Bullet Club henchman to the breakout run that I felt like he had last year of trying to become this serious heavyweight, the single star. And I felt like he covered a lot of ground. He is loved by the fans. Like, he is loved, like,
Yes.
by these crowds. Like, truly, like, there are very few people who I can say that are truly more over than El Phantasmo. And I think I felt kind of like we just negated all of that. Like, just kind of like just left all that on wayside. But I'm sad, guys. And I kind of like don't want to do this. And it's just like I said, this tournament was very much so a clean slate for everyone to reintroduce themselves. And I felt like he reintroduced himself, was like, I'm actually not a threat.
Right.
I was like, that's just not what we had seen before, in my opinion. Like, and I say this as a big El Phantasmo fan. I think he's great. I don't like this approach. And I think like it's beneath him because he more so, I think, than a lot of other people really needed like a breakout, standout moment of like, I don't need a faction. I can do this.
Yes.
And I think like even being stuck between Hantai and House of Torture, I think in itself is a downgrade of just like, to be quite honest, if there's not a sign that you just need to be alone, and I understand like, but he also doesn't want to be alone because
Sure.
I mean, that was obviously what came up here. You know, the only thing that I can say is that I think for World Tag League, I think he needs to be with Shota Umino.
Yeah, if there's one friend that outside of Jado, and I don't think Jado's in World Tag League mode right now, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. Hey, top form. That guy came behind me on a broadcast one time, slapped me right on the back, and I hurt for the next week. No, Phantasmo is definitely found himself a friend in Shota Umino. Shota's tried to lead Phantasmo down a positive path, especially when those negative tendencies almost called back to him, and we saw it back in Ryogoku on the finals night where Evil handed El Phantasmo the t-shirt and was like, that's your open opportunity, this could be your lifeline, this could be your last choice. And we didn't really get a conclusive result from that moment, but one of those things where it's just like, I think that Umino needs direction, Phantasmo needs direction. I'd have no problem seeing him in World Tag League.
And I think that they both not just lack direction, I think they both lack identity.
Sure.
And maybe they can find it together.
Right.
And I think also too, they have a very real relationship. Like, El Phantasmo has actually even been on this show, and he talks about his relationship with Shota. And like he always says there's so much of him that we haven't seen. And so maybe they can bring that out of each other. But I do think that a definite step down, I would say, this tournament for El Phantasmo. But he did have a top 5 match of the tournament, though.
He did, yeah. El Phantasmo versus Kinosuke Takeshita was such a special thing to be in that building for. We were close to, if not sold out, both nights of Korakuen for G1 this year. And it was, there's no better feeling in wrestling than a sold out Korakuen Hall outside of maybe a sold out Tokyo Dome. And, we're not there, but we're here. Right. And it was great. Phantasmo Takeshita was like, it's got to be top 5 tournament match of the entire time. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think for me, I guess I thought that was going to be the story of like, okay, after this, like, the sad boy stuff is over. He's going to just like, and then it kind of felt like we had this amazing match, Takeshita with the beautiful post-match comments, calling him Riley, saying thank you. I'm like, okay, after this, he's just gonna like snap out of it. It's gonna be great. And it's just kind of like, no.
Yeah.
You gotta like went right back to it, which is disappointing. But hey, things happen. Next, Hiroki Goto.
Oh wow. I it's hard. I want to give the thumbs up, and then part of me is like, we've seen this before out of Goto where he gets this groundswell and falls at the end. Right. And it feels a little half and half there. I love Goto, and so I want to give the up, but again, it's something we've seen in the past. It's almost like, Goto had a great G1, but all the way to basically the finals night, the spotlight was on Goto, and all of a sudden has been taken off and put on his tag partner in Yoshihashi. Yoshihashi getting that win over Finley on the finals night. Now there's a global heavyweight title match scheduled for, I believe, KOPW.
Yeah. I agree, because like at first I was like double thumbs up, but I have to think like, honestly, technically we haven't seen anything we've never seen before.
Sure.
Goto had some of the best matches of the tournament. Okay, he's done that before.
Right.
He was one of the best performers of this tournament. Okay, he's done that before. The fans fucking love him. They always do. I think, he is like an emotional disaster for me, because like the roller coaster of emotions I felt like I went on with Hiroki Goto. It was a lot of just like when he brought his kids out, I said, oh my God, guys, he's going to do it. It's coming home. Like I said, he's going to do it. I said, he's going to do it now. He had something to fight for, etc. eliminated.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe middle of the road. What I will say though is that I do believe that this year, I would like to believe is not a coincidence that Hiroki Goto had this big New Japan Cup and goes, has a really good G1.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that this reintroduced him as a main event player. Because I feel like for these last 2-ish years, he's definitely kind of just been toiling away in the tag division.
Sure.
I do believe that this year overall, but especially this G1, it has reintroduced him to the dance as a top guy. And so while I'm not sure if that actually finally equates to a world title, I do believe that he's somebody to keep an eye on going into Wrestle Kingdom in contention for other titles.
I think Goto needs to be in that position, in my personal take. I love Hiroki Goto, first off. I love his style. I connect him to that Never style a little bit. Goto, one of the better Never open weight champions we ever had, and Intercontinental champions and the like. But Goto's so good at pulling emotion out of you. We've seen it for so long, and it's something that we've seen in ring attempted to be replicated by guys like Shota Umino, by guys like Yota Tsuji, by guys like Yuya Uemura. The last 2 out of the 3 are the ones who are starting to put those pieces together. I think Goto needs to serve as the foil for the young generation, the new generation going forward. And that's something that he said in post-match comments he wants to do. He said, I'm upset that I've never gotten, sure, he's gotten his flowers and his due, but giving someone their flowers isn't paying their bills. Being world heavyweight champion pays their bills, right?
Absolutely.
And I think Hiroki Goto needs, I'd love to see that run, first off, with Goto as world champion. I think so many people have for so long, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, so to speak. But as we talk about a guy like Tetsuya Naito, who might have to one day in the next year or two take that step back, maybe again, just like Shingo Takagi, Goto sees himself in a role who, all right, well, if you're going to see your way out, I'm going to see my way forward.
And I think, if as nothing else in this tournament, it showed, if I'm New Japan higher ups, everybody shows fans still want it, and sometimes I feel like time passes on like guys some point where just people just like, okay, I don't care anymore. But it just felt like the smallest bit of hope. It was Goto Mania. Everybody was like, he's going to do it. He's finally going to do it. Just as immersed as they were, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so I feel like that's a good sign. And one thing that I've continued to say is that in the absence of guys like Okada and the decline of guys like Naito and Tanahashi physically, Goto is the last of a dying breed. And there are a lot of lessons that I feel like this generation, the Musketeers, Yuya Uemura, that they need to learn, and they haven't gotten to learn. And there's very few people left who are in tip-top condition to teach it.
Right.
And Goto is one of those people. And we've seen it in the matches that he's had with Yota Tsuji, and the matches he's had with Yuya Uemura, even going to the match with Takeshi, and Takeshi's not even a New Japan talent. It's those type of matches that only he is able to, the lessons he's able to teach.
Yeah.
He serves such an important role right now.
Absolutely, especially with all we've talked about. You look at Goto's history. Goto learned wrestling Tenzan and some of his highest profile stuff back during that period of his career. The world will learn stepping into the ring with Hiroki Goto. It's as simple as that.
Yep. Moving on. I'll save him for last. Yuya Uemura.
Oh, the absolute thumbs up, but what a travesty the way it ended. It doesn't impact the rating whatsoever. I haven't been a detractor of Yuya Uemura in my career as much as I've been a a guy who said, yes, Uemura is great inside the ring, but there's not substance outside of that. And I've come around on Yuya in the way of watching his G1 and going, no, that is the substance. It's right there. He doesn't need anything else. It's a very, and I don't want to call my shot early, but it's almost an ace-like quality of Yuya Uemura to be able to connect with the audience the way that he 100% has through his in-ring, on top of what he can do on a microphone, and on top of even, I have to give my hand to Yuya Uemura and all the credit in the world with the promotional work Yuya did going into this tournament. He went to, the town that he went to college in and his hometown and all these places to go and promote G1 Climax. And I'm not sure if you got your opportunity to watch. There was a little bit of a piece done on Yuya Uemura, a little documentary style piece. And it's really good for anyone that hasn't got out of their way to seen it. You absolutely should on the New Japan YouTube channel. It might be on New Japan World. But Yuya's an incredibly likable guy. And we've seen that more so ever since he lost the hair versus hair match with Yota Tsuji. We've seen, all right, he was stripped of his identity. What is his identity now? And I was questioning, well, I'm not sure what it is. He won KOPW. I said, maybe that's going to be what it's rooted in. It wasn't that. He lost it to Okan. What's it going to be? What's it going to be? It was in front of us the whole time. It's what Yuya can do inside of that ring that makes him so special. I was an early match in the tournament, but Uemura Takeshita was where in the middle of the match, I remember, I forgot who I was on the call with, maybe Callum Newman, something like that. I looked to my left and we kind of gave each other this look that's like, oh, brother, we're here. Like, this is what we were looking for, and we found it. And, then you get to the question of, well, was it a one-off performance? Was it this? Was it that? Well, then he kept putting in the same performances. Uemura versus Goto, I thought was great. Uemura versus Cobb, I thought was great. Uemura versus everyone in Block B for the most part, up until
even
that injury.
Finley too, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I thought Yuya was great this tournament, all things around.
I had been a Yuya Uemura skeptic, I'm not gonna lie, because I feel like he came back from excursion late. Later than anybody else. And I will say, I wasn't super impressed by his excursion run in TNA. I feel like he was, it wasn't bad, but it also wasn't good. Like, it wasn't stand out. But, I guess a lot of people don't stand out during an excursion. I think, like, most people don't. I can probably name on one hand the amount of people who had like a star excursion. And then he came back and, he joins Just Five Guys, and it kind of feels like, okay, what's he doing? And then the Yota Tsuji stuff and like the hair versus hair match, I felt was for me, it was underwhelming. Like, when I hear hair versus hair, I'm thinking blood feud. I'm thinking we're throwing each other, like trying to kill each other. And I don't think we got that. And also I felt like his moveset was limited of just like, arm drag, hip toss, arm drag, hip toss, arm drag, hip toss. And so I feel like I was very skeptical heading into this tournament. Like same thing like we were saying about Great O'Connor, right? Like a couple of months ago, this guy was eating lemons.
Yes.
It's hard to take you seriously. And then this tournament happens. And it feels like he puts it all together. And I think one thing that I said about him, like in those first couple nights of the G1, I said the difference between Yuya and his peers right now is that he came into this tournament feeling complete.
Right.
I feel like that's the difference between even Yota Tsuji, and I think all his greatness, and I think he is great, but it still kind of feels like, like maybe there's this one piece missing, like there's this one thing missing, and we've been able to say that about just about everybody. But Yuya in this tournament has felt complete, or at least the closest to that we've kind of seen from this generation. He feels like he's put it all together. He's super likable, and in the in-ring, he reminds you of a guy like Goto, who's able to bring out the emotion. I can't say enough good things about him. I did a complete 180 on him. I think he's one of my favorite people in New Japan right now, and I think like, as heartbreaking as his injury is, I do think it works in his favor a little bit, because I think like it has created a hunger for whenever he returns.
Yes.
I think that now people want to see Yuya Uemura. People are waiting and desperate to see Yuya Uemura.
Right.
And I think like that's a really, for somebody who wasn't even mentioned as a musketeer, to have people feeling that way, you can't look at that any way other than a win.
Right.
I think that out of his generation, aside from, actually, to be honest, no, I'd say that as far as like the G1 of how much it helped, I put him above Yoda actually,
Sure.
just because
Yeah.
like with Yoda already winning the New Japan Cup this year, I feel like we already knew that there's great things destined for his future. But as far as completely upping their stock and going back to reintroducing themselves as a better version of themselves, Yu Uemura knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next, of Jeff Cobb.
I
on the web.
Whoa.
It's my Siri. I don't know what happened. Okay.
Hey, there you go. Well,
Um,
Siri found Jeff Cobb on the web. I found Jeff Cobb in person. Yeah, no. Cobb is up for me, I think. I think Cobb's run as World TV champion has been a defining one so far. A lot of people, I think we're almost looking at Cobb at a little bit of a point where it was like, all right, he's just here. And Cobb's looking to prove like, hey, I'm not just here. I'm here and I'm the guy. I think that, and we heard about it a lot in post-match comments, Cobb talking about the impending new generation and going, hey, Bushi Road, New Japan Pro Wrestling, whoever's making decisions around here and building these cards out, you need to realize that before there's a new generation, there's a current generation, and Jeff Cobb isn't going anywhere. And I think he showed that a lot, making it very, very deep in the run in G1 Climax this year. I was really impressed with Jeff's performances.
I think Jeff Cobb reminds me of where Zack Sabre Jr. was, I would say about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, of just somebody who has been really good for a really long time, but almost to the point to where he was overlooked, of just like, well, Jeff Cobb's always good. Zack Sabre Jr. is always good, right? And kind of like blending into the background. But I think this year, Jeff Cobb has been one of the most consistently great performers in New Japan, easily. And I think that he's just leveled up his game. I think he's been able to just make magic with just about anyone. I think he's had a great TV title reign. But for me, I would say he's been I don't think he increased his stock at all.
Sure.
I think that he's just been great. Like, I think like I don't think that he's in a significantly better position than he was heading into this tournament, just because I think like he's like so consistently good. And the other person that I'll say is kind of like this, almost like Goto, but not like Goto in the sense of like, he hasn't like lost so many times in big matches. But the only other person I would say is kind of like that, I would put Hanare. Of just like, I think that Hanare didn't lose anything, but I don't think he gained anything.
Right.
But I'm a huge Jeff Cobb lover. I've loved this reign. I loved so many of his matches in this tournament. I honestly, B Block was meat block, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, it was meat block.
Was.
So many fantastic matches that I can't wait to finally like just sit down and like rewatch and cherry pick just my favorites. But yeah, my only thing is that Jeff Cobb now has a huge challenge in front of him. Tsuji.
Yes. And that is, I think Tsuji, we'll talk about him later, but foreshadowing that, there's no one riding higher momentum outside of the winner of this tournament. There's no one riding it. And it's gonna carry him into a TV title match with Jeff Cobb, a man that he's beaten this tournament. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. But for Jeff Cobb, all I have to say is I would like to see you versus Samoa Joe in the Tokyo Dome.
God bless. Hey, one of these days we're gonna have to get on here and talk about some dream matches, AEW New Japan Wrestle Dynasty. And
I have a list, brother.
You already hit on one of them. Oh God, especially no. I mean, it's not official that I am going to be on the call for that. I don't see why I wouldn't though. January 4th, I'll be in the building anyway, so I'll spend the night there. It doesn't matter. But yeah, no, that's gonna be God. That'd be something. Holy hell, Jeff Cobb, Samoa Joe.
Listen, Jeff Cobb, Samoa Joe, 15 minutes in the dome. Do you feel it? Are you
I feel
feeling
it.
it?
I feel it. I feel the energy. Yeah.
Oh man.
Ooh.
Going further in the meat block, Hanare. Like I've already said my piece on him. I think I don't think he lost anything for me, but I don't think he gained anything for me either. And I do think that him taking some substantial losses in this tournament as never openweight champion, knowing that he has Hiromu Takahashi coming up, very similar position as like I said, Jeff Cobb. I think Hanare's, in my opinion, I believe he's the natural heir to that belt. Right. I feel like that belt was made for him in this generation. He's the natural heir of the Katsuyori Shibata, Tomohiro Ishii's, who held that never openweight championship. Hanare embodies never. That BMF belt. Yeah, I don't think he lost anything for me, but I don't think he gained anything.
Yeah, I think I'm exactly there with you. I think it was a positive for Hanare. It's the best G1 Hanare's had out of any of them. We've seen a lot of iterations from Aaron Hanare to Toa Hanare to the man with the face tattoo and the Maori ancestry that the mana that burns through Hanare. We've seen that now more than ever. We know that has brought him closer to having more success in G1 than not compared to previous years. And it's only a matter of time for Hanare, I think.
I agree. I think also too, I think that had a lot to do with it, of just because we've seen so many iterations of him, evolving. And I feel like this was the first G1 where he was 100% comfortable in his skin.
Right.
Came in as a champion. Like, he felt very much so like a boss. He took up space. Right. And I think that's one thing that a lot of the younger generation in New Japan have struggled to do, is taking up space. Of when you walk into a room, can people point you out that you're important, like you're a top guy, like you're him. Yeah. And I think that Hanare, in this point right now in New Japan, he's taking up space.
Yep.
Like he's taking up space, and it's very clear that he's not, he's somebody. He's definitely somebody. So yeah, I put him middle of the road, but very good performance. Next we have David Finlay.
I'm throwing it. I really have loved David Finlay's run in G1 this year. I absolutely have.
I am typically not a big David Finlay fan, because I felt like he was also an identity, I think, living in the shadow of Jay White, trying to be this the savage and so many different things. And I feel like this G1, he reintroduced himself of yeah, I'm Bullet Club leader. Yeah, I think that I'm so self-important, but also I can wrestle. And I think the shenanigans were kind of put to the side for the most part, and he just got in the ring and did his thing. He did his thing. He let the work speak for itself. I really enjoyed David Finlay during this tournament, and I think he has a few of my favorite matches from the tournament come from David Finlay.
Yep. It was dominant. Yeah. It was a dominant run. It really was. And I thought it was fantastic. There's no more addition I think I could give to that. I think Finlay is a guy who, he joined me at the English broadcast booth, I think back in Suito, Osaka on night 8. And it was one of those moments where I don't get a lot of time to talk to Finlay. He's in the War Dog locker room. He's scheming and doing whatever it is David Finlay does, not me to judge for. But he gave a lot of insight into, what do I need Bullet Club for? Well, I don't need Bullet Club. I could leave Bullet Club at any time, but I'm going to use them while I have them. And, as we've seen Gabe Kidd develop, Jake Lee develop, every other member of the War Dogs has been bringing gold, bringing bodies. That's what David Finlay wants. I've started to not really respect, but somewhat respect the fact that David Finlay is the mastermind that he's always told us he is. We're seeing
He's
it
got
now.
results.
We're seeing it now, and that is very impressive. It leaves me a little fearful because there's only one thing worse I could think of than a David Finlay main event in the Tokyo Dome, and that's an evil main event in the Tokyo Dome. For very, I saw it for very similar reasons, but David Finlay, all things considered, he's been putting in the work. Absolutely, just world-class athlete. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Very impressed with David Finlay this tournament. I think that there were a few people who I think significantly changed my opinion of them during this tournament. I would say, well, I mean, Evil, I still hate you, but just a little bit less, I will say. Evil, Great O'Khan, Yu Uemura, and David Finlay, I think, really took advantage of that clean slate of this tournament. I think that they really took advantage of reintroducing themselves to the audience and like really showing a different side of themselves. Because here's the thing, I do think that in the midst of so much up and down in New Japan, I think with so much interference between the War Dogs and House of Torture, I think the in-ring quality 100% suffered for months because, when every other match is being interrupted and you can't finish, the in-ring quality, I think, of New Japan was suffering greatly. And I think this tournament was a fantastic return to form of people showing that, yes, shenanigans happen, but this is still the best pure wrestling in the world. And so I feel like everybody really took that responsibility. And like I said this on night one, I don't know what Tanahashi said to people in the locker room or something, if there was like a group pep talk or something, but it feels like just about everybody came into this tournament and approached their matches with a chip on their shoulder, whether their heels, faces, or anything, but understand like we're representing New Japan at a very crucial time.
Right.
Everybody needs to put their best foot forward, and I think like that was what I got as a fan. That's what I got from so many of the performances in this tournament, and I think David Finlay was definitely one of those people who definitely felt like, even though he'll say that he's not, it definitely felt like he had a chip on his shoulder and a point to prove. And I think especially for the global belt, it's still been waiting for, I think, those defining matchups to like prove why this is the essentially the second top title in New Japan. I think it's still been waiting for that defining matchup. And I think as a champion, we started to see him really perform, even though like obviously the title wasn't on the line, but we really started to see him perform on that other level that I think that I've personally been waiting for. So thumbs up for David Finlay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next, Ren Narita.
I think I would place, and again, this is the House of Torture conversation, so it's a very similar one to have. I think a lot of the things I have to say about Evil, I could say about Narita in the same way. I don't know what Narita sees in House of Torture, and it shocks me that he keeps his place there the way that he does. But if we're talking purely points, you got to give it the up. It was a better performance for Ren comparatively to the previous year. That was technically his second G1. He considers it his first because the first as the true sold out Ren Narita. Take that for what you will, but it is a style that does not particularly connect to me. I know it doesn't particularly connect to a lot of people. The run-ins, the outside, all that, and a lot of it could be applied to Evil and Narita. I think personally it's right on the middle there. No shift, no change. But if you look at the results, they do say otherwise.
Yeah, he's second to Yoda Tsuji as far as like best point performance.
Yeah.
I think I hate it. 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 And honestly, I preferred Evil's performance in this
Really?
tournament to
Wow.
Ren Narita. And I used to be really high on Ren Narita. I don't get it. I don't get the House of Torture thing. I just I don't get it. Maybe it's not for me to get, you know.
Sure.
I,
I
I
get it.
just don't I don't understand. I just don't understand. And that was probably he was definitely the lowest part for me in B block.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
his matches were definitely the lowest part. And I think it's because like there's so much potential. There's so much potential. And I think heading into a couple years ago, when like they had all first come back from excursion, I was probably highest on Red. Shibata's my favorite. Is my second favorite wrestler of all time. So I was really high on Red. I don't know, man, but I'm interested to see where he goes from here because, like you said, it was a fantastic point total. I
Right.
mean, you can't go much higher than that. But I just was not moved.
Sure. I get
So
it.
I don't know if I'll go middle of the road. I can't
Sure.
say go down because I can't say like he hurt himself at all. But yeah, so middle of the road there. Well, no, I'll save this guy for second to last. Bolton Oleg.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a thumbs up all the way. Bolton, what a nice guy.
What a stud.
He's such a killer in the ring, and that's the scary part. The scariest people in professional wrestling, I say this both behind the scenes and in front and inside the ring, the scariest people in professional wrestling are the ones that are going to smile in your face and hit you from behind. And Bolton's not doing so menacingly or like in a Kanemaru style, but rather is just one of those guys who he'll tear you apart limb from limb and then be the first guy to put the ice pack on you. We saw
Gentle
it.
Giant.
We saw it a lot throughout this tournament. And I think that it got him to the point where he was. I know Bolton was really disappointed. He ended on the 8-point mark, but very well could have ended on the 6-point mark had Yuya not gotten injured. Those points with the one match that Yuya had left was with Bolton, so those points were added to the total. Bolton ending on 8. I know that Bolton was really disappointed to not get to have that match with Yuya. So it's one of those where I'm kind of looking down the line and I'm studying the cards, and there's no timetable lined up for when Yuya could be back from injury. I know it was a pretty serious shatter of that elbow. But anything can happen. I'd love to see them in a singles together.
I think even more so than Callum Newman, obviously, just being in this tournament was going to be big, right?
Right.
But Bolton Oleg is clearly has a very bright future in New Japan Pro Wrestling. His first match was a dark match at Wrestle Kingdom.
Yeah.
He won gold with the president.
Yep.
As a young lion, he defeated said president to get into this tournament. His future is very bright off rip, but like he nailed the presentation from day one. The fact that he opened up the G1 in that first match, like, wait, was that the first match?
Yeah, it was. Bolton and Ren was the first match in G1.
Yes, it was, and then Shota and Callum was next.
Yep, absolutely.
He nailed the presentation. Loved the the nod to his home country. He is money, and the fact that he even got 8 points in a first G1 is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. 8 points is a really good performance, for a first time G1 guy. I'm such a fan of this guy.
Yeah.
I'm such a fan of this guy. I think that nothing but thumbs up. And the thing is, he's had some great matches. I love that he was in the meat block.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
waiting for him versus Yota Tsuji. Got him versus Takeshita, him versus Jeff Cobb, him versus Hanare, him versus Hiroki Goto. Can't ask for much more than that. I'm
Right,
all
right.
in on
Yeah, that was great. And
both of these.
it's funny. Like, sorry, talking about the blocks real quick. I think when the blocks were first announced, people were much more excited about Block A than Block B. Like I saw a lot more fan discourse about Block A being the one. Like, oh, this is going to be the one. It was Block B for me. Admittedly, it was.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that it was the promise of a new guy who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a minute, Takeshita coming in, and then a guy like Bolton Oleg, who we've seen in the New Japan ranks, but how's he going to fare in and among the big boys, so to speak? And then a guy like Goto, who we know has been in this spot multiple times over, but amongst this new generation now. So Block B was where it was at for this tournament.
100%. You say his name and he appears. Konosuke Takeshita.
Mm.
Um, I don't have enough hands.
Oh, yes.
I don't have enough thumbs to put up. Takeshita, in my opinion, he brought a star power and like just a pure presence that has been missing in the sense of like this almost like, I hate to be blasphemous, but almost like this wrestling god like figure
Yes.
of just, and the thing is like I was concurrently rewatching old G1 matches while like keeping up with the tournament. So I'm rewatching like Kenny Omega versus Kota Ibushi and watching like matches like this, and I'm like, he stands up like these guys of just like, when you see this guy, this is going to not be a good match, a great match.
Right.
And like this is appointment level viewing. Every Takeshita match felt unskippable. Like there was, and I felt like everyone who wrestled him came out of it better than they were.
Absolutely. And we're just talking about Bolton. He's on that list. Bolton with the win over
100%.
Takeshita, especially. Oh my gosh. And like, you talked about like El Phantasmo not having your favorite G1 performance, but you had to love that match with Takeshita.
100%.
Jeff Cobb launching Takeshita across the ring was one of the top clips of
Cinema.
this entire tournament. Like,
Cinema.
yeah. It was great. Takeshita's one of those guys. And my buddy Chris Charlton joins me on Color every single night for the most part of G1. Especially heading into the finals, he was like, I have a message that I'm going to deliver on tonight's broadcast, and there's a certain person that I hope hears it, who very well might be listening. And we're calling the finals, and he goes,
I
"If
remember
my
that.
name's Tony Khan and I have the checkbook that I have, I'm throwing it at a certain man named Konosuke Takeshita. I think Takeshita should be 100% a top name, a top signing, a marquee main event star wherever he is. Who's to know? Obviously, not my place to talk about anything happening in All Elite Wrestling. That's not where I work. But I know that a lot of the boys love Takeshita. There's a lot of guys that I talked to who I was like, man, what was it like working with Takeshita? It was your first time doing that. I was like, oh, he was fluid. He felt like Okada. And that was big. That was something that I look at a guy like Konosuke Takeshita, and if I'm Bushiroad in the powers that be in the company I do work for. Now, here's where I can talk about this. I'm throwing all the yen at Konosuke Takeshita. That's what's happening.
Every single piece of currency
Yep.
that they have at their disposal, I think of any company, because truly he genuinely feels like that once in a generation wrestler that every company should want to have them on their roster.
Right.
That was just how good of a performance he has. As a big All Elite Wrestling fan, listen, if Takeshita isn't either a champion or a Continental Classic winner by the end of the year, we ride. We ride at dawn. Like, we ride at dawn. Just, I can't say enough great things about this performance. He absolutely killed it. And I think he restored the feeling. And what I will venture to say, and I'm willing to bet everything on this, what he did do is that he secured himself a big match in the Tokyo Dome, I think, for Wrestle Dynasty.
I'd be shocked to not see it. I'd be shocked if it didn't happen.
We will be seeing Konosuke Takeshita again in New Japan Pro Wrestling, at least at Wrestle Dynasty. Yeah. And I am firmly confident in that. And if any wrestler deserves to have a marquee Tokyo Dome match, oh, it's him.
I agree.
Konosuke Takeshita, I think, like, if that didn't increase the stocks, you know, in Tony Khan, I don't know. But I will be complaining about it if it doesn't. Next, second to last, we have Yota Tsuji.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's very evident that our next two conversation points are going to be thumbs up for both guys, right? And for absolute great reason. I think we could even talk about both right now because it's hard to talk about one without the other. It's Yota Tsuji, his ascent throughout Block B. It started off very slowly, and there was a part of me that would watch the post-match comments, and very rarely Tsuji had something to say about his opponent. What was he talking about for the most part? Marlowe pudding. And you got to appreciate a man who's on the grind with the sponsors. I get that. Trust me. But there was a part of me where I was like, man, is Yota Tsuji, is his head in this? Not in the way of him not being focused, but is he taking his opponents too lightly? And he's taking loss in the early goings. And suddenly things started to pick up close to the end. And it took just one victory over David Finlay to put him into that final slot. And God, Yota Tsuji, thought it was incredibly telling. We're sitting in a packed out 8,000 plus seater Ryogoku Sumo Hall, and Zack Sabre Jr., one of the most beloved Gaikokujin wrestlers that our company has to offer, one of the most beloved foreign talents that New Japan has seen in quite a long time, and they're chanting for Yota Tsuji. And it was a very 50-50 back and forth. It was one of those things where Yota and the crowd was chanting for Yota. Zach would go down, crowds chanting for Zach. And it's like, there was this magical energy in the building on that night. It's one of my favorite matches I've ever called off of, I know the people love this word, off of aura alone, because of that notion that whether Zack Sabre Jr. or Yota Tsuji win this finals, win the main event, New Japan Pro Wrestling is going to thrive because the crowd loves both of these men. And absolutely. I think that is something where Tsuji's going to ride that momentum. Yes, it's a hard loss to Zach, but there's never an easy win that comes over Zach, right? And Tsuji's going to have to recover, and take that energy of knowing how badly that Ryogoku Sumo Hall wanted Tsuji to win that main event. Just as badly as they wanted Zach to do the same, but going to have to carry it in to his match with Jeff Cobb for the World TV title.
Absolutely. I think that Yota Tsuji didn't win here, but I think it's a no-brainer. He is a future G1 Climax winner.
Sure.
And in my opinion, I feel like he is 90% complete, which is miles above most of his peers, right? But I think that there's still that 10% missing of just like, I'm not sure. And I think like maybe part of it comes from, I think that he needs that rival. And I think maybe that person might be Naito. Maybe it's going to be Shingo. I think it's probably going to be from conquering his LIJ demons. I think like that's going to take him to the next level. And I think like there's a lot of stories to be told within there. Because I mean, you know, hey, LIJ is LIJ. Like I said, 4 alpha males in one faction. I think they all have mountains to climb, and for a lot of them, their mountains are each other.
Yeah.
But I do believe that he performed beautifully well in this tournament. He, more so than his peers, I think, has nailed the identity piece. It's very clear he knows who he is. He knows what he wants to do. He knows he takes up space.
Yes. Yeah.
He takes up space. And I think one thing going into this tournament, not going into this tournament, but going into the final, I was reading through comments of the match from both Japanese and Western fans, and like it was pretty much split. Like of seeing people saying like, "Oh, I want Yota Tsuji to win," or "I want Zach to win." But honestly, you want to know what most people said? They were like, "Honestly, I'm cool with either option. I'm just really thankful we have such great options for these guys.
Yeah.
That was truly the overwhelming consensus. And I think like that just speaks volumes. And I think like it was the right final, in my opinion, it was the right result. As a true Zack Sabre Jr. truther, man.
Yes.
I would like to say a lot of you bullied me. You tried to bully me. You tried to silence me. You tried to silence me. You tried to silence so many of us. You said, "Oh, why are you picking Zach? He has no chance. He's not going to win." Guess what? The mighty don't kneel.
You're right.
The mighty don't kneel.
No, they don't. Wow.
It came home, guys.
It did.
But truly, me and Charlie talked about this on our episode prior. Just seeing the journey of Zach from the disbandment of Suzuki-gun, going back to the drawing board, Wrestle Kingdom 17, he debuts with the blonde hair. He defeats Ren Narita to become the inaugural New Japan World Television Champion. This is his first New Japan singles title in 6 years since he had been there. TMDK comes out. They invite him to be the front man. And it feels like the rest is history. He goes on this magical run with this TV belt. He takes it all over the world. He defends it. He shows that he can be a singles champion. He shows that he's the guy. And I think this, even like the year that he's had, the match that he had with Bryan Danielson, defeating Orange Cassidy and Forbidden Door. I have seen Zack Sabre Jr. wrestle in 4 different countries.
Yep.
And in each one of them, he is loved. Whether it's the U.S., whether it's Japan, whether it's Canada, whether it's whether it's England, Zack Sabre Jr. is so special. And I think that a lot of times we use the best technical wrestler as a qualifier, but he is genuinely one of the best wrestlers, period, in the world.
Yeah.
And he has done the work, and I just couldn't be happier. I genuinely couldn't be happier with the result. It came home. The mighty don't kneel.
No, they don't. Yeah, there's no one better that it could have gone to as well. Zack Sabre Jr. is, by all accounts, with all those that like him in the locker room, and all those, even myself included, when I first came into Japan, there's that feeling of loneliness that goes with going to a different country. It's something that Zach first experienced when he joined the Noah Dojo in the early 2010s or whatever it might have been, right? And he recognized that, and he was one of the first guys to kind of pull me aside personally and be like, "Hey, you need anything, I'm here. It is this, that, and the other." And not exactly holding a hand by any mean, but just kind of being there as a resource and as a friend. And I love calling Zack Sabre Jr. a friend. And for me to be able to, even though he's a very new friend of mine, to be able to see him reach the actual climax, the pinnacle of what our company has in terms of tournaments, G1 Climax 34 was the one. It was awesome, and it was awesome to be on the call for it as well. It's going to be great to see what Zach does going forward. And of course, we talked about it earlier, the KOPW situation, the way it's set, King of Pro Wrestling 2024. We're going to return to Ryogoku in October, and whoever wins in Kobe with the World Heavyweight title opportunity, Great-O-Khan, Tetsuya Naito, one of those two men, it's facing Zack Sabre Jr., and you're staring down the barrel of a gun when you know you are walking into a match with a guy like Zach.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan, just a huge fan of how that went. We had a break from tradition.
Yes.
So instead of challenging at the Dome, he's not going to wait. He's going to challenge at King of Pro Wrestling in Ryogoku. So this is his favorite venue to wrestle in. Listen, I can say this as a New Japan fan. The fall typically sucks because it's typically boring because you have to wait until Wrestle Kingdom and things like that. I think this is the most unpredictable fall season that New Japan has produced in years. And I'm so excited because I genuinely have no idea what's going to happen. And for me as a fan, even if things aren't perfect or exactly what I like, if I feel like things are unpredictable, I can count that as a win. Like, I think I'm excited to find out what's going to happen. And also, like, the idea of Zack Sabre Jr. walking into Royal Quest in England, that homecoming as IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. Chills.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I'm excited for it all. If that is to what, if that is to be the case, if that's what we're to expect, we could see that coming up in Royal Quest. That's even more pressure, by the way, on Zack Sabre Jr. because he's either walking in, he's going to walk in with a trophy, maybe. You know that for a fact. If he plans on taking it through customs, God forbid, that's got to be a struggle.
I
But
know, right?
you know, I can barely make it through customs. I'm a human being. Zack Sabre Jr. on the other side of things, though, you know, either just bringing the trophy, which is all fine and dandy, or 2 sets of hardware, world heavyweight title around the waist or around the shoulder as well. It'll be a special homecoming one way or another for Zach coming up at Royal Quest. But ahead of Royal Quest, we have a lot of stuff coming up, right? And ahead of Royal Quest, we have Zack Sabre Jr. coming up on Capital Collision, August 30th, New Japan World Pay-Per-View, where we are going to be live in the U.S. capital of Washington, D.C. It's going to be a hot night of action there as well.
Absolutely. And I know we're coming up on time here, so close with this. Top 5 matches of the tournament. You don't have to order them because I feel like ordering them, that's half the work.
Sure.
If you had to pick your top 5 of this tournament, what are your top 5 matches?
Yeah, I think I have to exclude the finals from this, not because it's on the list, but because it's too obvious, right? So I think that everything else would go from there. I'll put Gabe Kidd, Jake Lee, and Korakuen Hall on that list. I really loved Gabe Kidd, Jake Lee, not the actual bell to bell, the 10 to 12 that happened before it. And just the way that it ended, the changes we saw in Jake Lee genuinely captivated my interest more than anything else had out of Jake Lee up to that point. So I thought that was great. I have to give Gabe Kidd Zack Sabre Jr. on that list from Yokohama Budokan. Thought that was incredible as well. You could damn well put every Konosuke Takeshita match on this list, but if I had to pick a couple, top 5 list of Konosuke Takeshita, I'd have to put the El Phantasmo match on the list from Korakuen Hall. I also would 100% Konosuke Takeshita, Yuya Uemura on that list. Again, you'll notice my matches I'm choosing are kind of me finding turning points with certain guys. That was my one with Yuya Uemura.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a good list right there. I'd put Shingo Takagi, Tetsuya Naito on there for the spectacle of it because I just, I'm a Shingo guy through and through, and seeing what he was able to do stepping in the ring with Naito was a really fun change of pace. And yeah, this year's G1, and again, my first to be as a part of the company, but this year's G1, I followed the G1 33 very loosely last year because this is around the time last year that I had first gotten word I might be considered for this role. I said, all right, well, I know nothing about Japanese wrestling. Let's start the history now. And, so following, and I remember kind of going through the social media sphere at that time where people were like, well, Naito's winning. Like early on in the tournament, people were like, Naito's winning G1 33. Naito's winning. And then there were moments of doubt, but it came to be in the end. And I know that was something held on the Western fan base. Some people felt in Japan as well. And getting the opportunity to talk to a couple of fans that approached me in Japan, hey, I listen in English coverage and all that, which is awesome, by the way. I had no idea that was a thing. Japanese fans can love listening in English commentary. That they would come up to me and they'd be like, hey, what are you thinking of G1? Oh, I'm loving it, blah, blah, blah. And the conversation eventually skewed to, yeah, I have no idea who's going to win. And as you talked about earlier, that's where pro wrestling's at its best, in your opinion. That's where it's at its best, in my opinion, when I have no idea what to expect. And all of that leading into what's coming up very, very soon with, Capital Collision. We're going to main event Momo Watanabe versus Mercedes Moné for the Strong Women's Championship. That's going to be a hell of a time. And then that's going to carry us into the Destruction Tour. Destruction Tour carries us into King of Pro Wrestling. And it's a typical schedule that we have. But there are people who I know will tune out after G1 and, okay, I'll come back for Power Struggle and maybe I'll come back for the Dome. But you're going to want to tune in for Super Junior Tag League. You're going to want to come in for World Tag League. These are things that are now we're upping the stakes of because they could contribute down to the wire what the main event of the Tokyo Dome is. That's where this is special for me.
I agree. For me, I would say my top 5. I'm going Shingo versus Sonata.
Yes.
Zach versus Gabe. Goto versus Takeshita.
Oh, yeah.
El Phantasmo versus Takeshita. And I would say Yuya versus. I'm stuck between Yuya versus Takeshita or Yuya versus Hiroki Goto. But that would be my top 5. Honestly, if I could do a top 5 of just Takeshita matches, I think I would as well. He was just that good. I would say my top 5 performers would probably be of the tournament: Takeshita, Gabe, Zach, Shingo, Yuya.
I think I have the exact same list, honestly.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me.
Like purely in-ring performers, I would give it that. So yeah. In closing, one dream match. If you could have it your way, what would you like to see in the Dome? Just one.
You know, you did say Samoa Joe, Jeff Cobb, and that's got me going now. That's really got me thinking. I think, you know, okay, if we're talking the main event of either Wrestle Dynasty or Wrestle Kingdom this year, I would love some sort of Zack Sabre, and we didn't see these two cross paths at all in this tournament. I think Zack Sabre Jr., Konosuke Takeshita could move mountains. And I would love to see that. And we could see it. Who's to know what Wrestle Dynasty looks like? And if Zach gets his way of becoming world champion, well, will he defend one night, 2 nights in the Tokyo Dome? This is the stuff that's up in the air. There's all the possibility in the world we get a Zach versus Takeshita run.
Real. I'll lob one to the women here. Give me Athena versus Mayu Iwatani.
Oh my God, yes.
For the IWGP Women's Championship. So
oh my gosh, yes.
That'll just be mine. But thank you so much, Walker. I'm so glad that we were finally able to do this. We didn't get to answer questions, but you know, I'll just go through and answer them individually on Twitter. Y'all just have to deal with it. Just because guess what? Dynamite's about to start. And so
that's real. That's real.
And I haven't eaten. But anyway, I appreciate you for coming on here. Would you like to plug anything? How can people find you?
Yeah, just, you know, at Velvet Voice WS on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I don't know. Offer me a job. I don't care. Just kidding. I'm happy where I am. I love this place. No, I'm all over social media, though. You could find me wherever that may be. YouTube, Twitch. God knows I'm somewhere on something. But you are going to want to tune in for what's coming next because, you know, G1 Climax is, you know, we talk about, and when you talk about story progression, it starts with the exposition and then the rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. That's the evolution of a story. And it's so funny to me because the climax of G1 Climax to me is actually the beginning of the story. It's Correct. The exposition. And, you know, the rising action is going to take us into Capital Collision coming up in, I guess, a little over a week now in Washington, D.C., NJPW World Pay-Per-View. It's going to be well worth any price of admission whatsoever, whether you're live in person or on New Japan World, because not just first-time dream match, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Teton, hell of a clash of styles we'll be seeing. Tetsuya Naito, TJP in singles action as well. Strong openweight championship, Gabe Kidd, Leo Rush, top match of the night. We said it earlier on, Mercedes Monet, my first time getting to call a Mercedes match. Very excited for that. Calling as well Momo Watanabe, first time for me as well. They're going head-to-head for the Strong Women's Championship. So a lot to talk about into the lead up, what will take us into the Destruction Tour. You are not going to want to take your eyes off of New Japan Pro Wrestling in the last half of 2024.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your work. You've done absolutely incredible with this G1. Thank you all for listening to this podcast. I'm so happy to be back talking about my favorite thing. Yeah, you can always find me at Lyric Wrestling on the Twitters and the Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Lyric Swinton. But until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.